Lead by inspiring. Lead by experience. Lead by example. Lead by. The Leadership Podcast brought to you by Ezeni. My name is Matt Stancombe and I'm your host, bringing you thought-provoking, inspirational chat every month. Hear from leaders, business owners, coaches and subject matter experts from across a variety of industries. So however you consume your podcasts, turn up the volume, relax, and above all, enjoy this month's guest.
Welcome back to another Ezeni Lead By episode with me, Matt. Today, I'm in the Ezeni and Ignition head office here in leafy Hertfordshire, and I'm very lucky to have some faces and names that some of you, avid listeners, will know very well, and some of me may not. So we're going to introduce the team behind the Ezeni brand right now. So I'm really, really happy to have you all with me. So thanks for joining me.
Welcome. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, great to be here, and we'll get the nerves out the way first. We'll move through the team and introduce you all and settle into this episode. I think we're going to have a great conversation. The plan to reflect back on Series 1 as well. So I'm going to start with ladies first.
Ooh.
Over to you,
What
Genevieve.
do you want to know about me?
Well, Genevieve Grant, you are an associate coach from the Ezeni team. And let's talk about your history and why you've joined forces with us and helping us in the topics of leadership. So let's have a little introduction from you.
Okay, so probably what might be most useful to know is that I've been hanging out with people trying to get other people to do stuff since the 90s and sort of took on the role of coach in the early noughties. So I've been thinking about how we lead and how we guide. And my own experiences in lots of different global corporate spaces. And then in about 2014, 2015, I took myself to much more intimate spaces. So I predominantly only work with organizations who do work that I really believe in or individuals that I admire. And that's on my bio. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a bold move. And it's a filter that I put in place to raise my own game. And I feel like it's a good example of how to put yourself out into the world, right?
Yes.
Say what you don't want to do anymore. you know.
So you're carefully choosing who you work with and how you represent your brand and create that synergy with your clients.
Yeah, and so that I can be more me and be more ethical, and then I can bring more to the table. Because you can't work with leaders if you're at all faking it. And so for me, it's always about going deeper. I do a lot of philosophical work, so I can think deeply, quickly. That's sort of my space.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So let's come over to Jason. Jason, what can you tell us about your background?
I'm humbled by Genevieve.
I mean, you've got to follow that.
High moral, principled approach to life.
I'm just showing off.
So you won't work with me, right? Yeah. So Jason Dawe, I've been I started in the automotive sector, 1986 on the D, for those people who can remember, in the UK anyway. Thoroughly enjoyed it, very much customer facing, sales and so forth. Then I went into some consultancy, working with UK brands, but also working around the world, working with motorcycle brands as well and that kind of stuff, fascinating stuff. And then started to get into kind of more consultancy and working with management teams. That was great. And then took a kind of an unexpected career path move, left that company because it was sold and bought by another company, and started working in media. So I've written for the Sunday Times for about a decade, did some TV stuff as well, and then got into film production. And since about sort of 2003, had a mixture of kind of roles really. What the filming did was got me the opportunity to work with a lot of really interesting people. So a bit like you said, Genevieve, people I've kind of seen and thought, wow, I wonder how they do that. And then had the opportunity to sit down and talk to them and ultimately end up working with them. So I got very much into elite performance sport, lots of sort of different businesses outside of automotive as well. And now I kind of spend my time really kind of fascinated by what high performance means. So still very involved in elite performance sport as well, and understanding how team dynamics work and how the individuals within that work. So I always think of myself as a bit of a magpie, in the sense of getting great ideas and inspiration from people that perform very, very well, and then trying to kind of take that and share that with other people, almost on their behalf.
Yes.
Because I think, collectively they've had a lot more experience than I could get in one lifetime. And if I can distill that and share that, then that's, kind of job done.
And if you don't mind me saying, Jason, you've always said, and I think it's so important to stress this, you're a great storyteller. You collate information and your experience, and you tell great stories and insight.
Very kind.
And that's really powerful to distill that, as you say, to our clients and your clients.
I guess for me, I kind of deal in stories because I understand things when people tell me a story. So what I end up doing is making it into a language I understand. And when I understand it, and just as you said, Genevieve, you've got to believe in what you're saying. You can't fake it. Once you get that story and it makes sense to you, hopefully, if you share that story with other people, it has that similar kind of resonance. So
Yes.
I just enjoy it. I think stories are far more engaging than just kind of facts and models and academic principles. For me, it's stories. Yeah,
and that's why this sort of medium is so great, because it allows people to have those anecdotal moments and storytelling, and it's in a dynamic that people feel like they're in the room with you, and they're engaged and they're inspired by it. So, on that note, Phil's under pressure now to give us a little bit of background. But Phil, you've waited patiently there.
That's
Tell
right. I was
us
just
about
enjoying
yourself.
listening to the two of you. That's been great. So my name's Phil. I've been in the learning and development space now for just over 20 years. I was 96 on the N.
Oh, okay.
For those
A little bit
in
later.
the UK. But my previous experience, that was in the leisure industry and the gaming industry. And most of my work now is predominantly around leadership and management, training, development, and coaching has actually been part of what I've done now for about 14 years. Usually on a one-to-one basis, sometimes with smaller groups. But you typically with frontline managers up to some C-suite individuals where they are just looking for some external proverbial wall to bounce things off of and kind of help them sort of work through their own thinking. I'm just incredibly passionate about learning and development and helping other people in terms of whatever role it is they're doing in a wide variety of industries as well, in terms of actually how can we learn to be better and continue to improve and help and support our people.
Yes, and well said, Phil. And I think the dynamic here, and for those obviously watching and listening, we obviously know each other well. We're working together and by association, and you support us on lots of other projects with our parent company as well. And the reason that we have this tightly knit formed team is because we are all so passionate about inspiring and leading future talent and really influencing the businesses that we deal with and the clients beyond just the typical bottom line principles of an organization. It's not all about the profits. We're looking at the people that drive those profits and opportunity and market share. And I think that's why we all are so passionate, is because we can tell great stories. We can make sure that we influence the right people based upon our own morals, beliefs and values. And with the experience that we all have, people will stop, look and listen because the credibility is there.
It's also really good as a kind of a trainer or a coach or facilitator, whatever you want to call the stuff we do. It can be quite a lonely job. And it's also really important that you've got, a group of people like we have here, because you learn stuff from each other, you inspire stuff. Every time I spend time with Genevieve, I come away going, oh yeah, that's another little angle on it. And the same with Phil, and it's kind of taking that time to invest in ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you can be at the top of your game, but unless you keep being inspired and keep learning stuff, you get that kind of skills erosion. And
but I think that's one of the responsibilities we have when you're working in learning and development, is you have to be open to learn and develop.
Definitely.
And it was...
don't tell other people to do it. Do yourself, guys.
But doing yourself as well. And actually, it was one of the key things I took from episode 2
Yes.
with Becky, where one of the things that she said really, really stuck with me as something I've always believed in, is this: I don't want to become irrelevant.
Yes.
And I think one of the things for us when we do this type of stuff is that for me is the biggest risk, actually. And it's the thing I've always been that's been my biggest fear, is that that's what I don't want to become. So actually I think that responsibility to keep ourselves at the front of, okay, what does good development look, sound and feel like? in order to pass that knowledge on and cascade that down to other people. I think that's L&D's role within a commercial corporate environment. It should be us that's driving the agenda for that. And interestingly, you said about the profitability. Well, that's the output of what we do. And certainly one of the things I've seen change over the past sort of 3-4 years is more and more businesses are now getting that.
Yes,
is actually the bottom line. What we do can have a direct impact on that bottom line when it's done right and when it's done well. And actually being able to demonstrate the ROI of what we do and why we do it. I'm not saying it's gotten easier, but I think people are now starting to see a little bit more of actually
I think
investing in our people actually has these commercial
I think
outcomes.
the measures traditionally have been appalling for return on investment.
Yeah.
My starter industry, automotive, how many cars you sell, how much money do you make on each one, profit per unit. Thank you. Sorry, I've never been told I'm too quiet. Becoming relaxed, Matt. I'm just slumping more in my seat. But those measures, when you talk about development and that, which can take time, it's not just about the bottom line. No. The bottom line will come, But if that's all you're measuring, then
it's a really narrow.
And I think that's one of the joys of working with, athletes and particularly athletes in a field like, I was very lucky to work with a Paralympic athlete called Helene Rainsford, and she just won gold at the Beijing Olympics, and that's not an occupation. You're doing it for money, so there isn't a KPI that my salary's increased by that or whatever. Yes, you can win medals. Yes, you can improve your times, but there's a kind of an elegant purity in just trying to be the best you can.
Absolutely.
And what I like about that is you then take those principles and you apply it in a commercial environment, and of course it's going to work.
Yeah.
Of course it's going to work, but it comes from the right place. I remember, I'm going to tell a story, Matt, a very brief story.
We like the stories.
Okay, I'll tell a story. and she is a truly, truly inspiring athlete, and her story is fascinating because she started out trained to be a ballerina. Then there was an incident that meant that she ended up in a wheelchair. She then took up basketball, got very good at basketball very, very quickly, and was actually down at Dawe Lake down near Reading, doing an interview there. And they said, "Have you ever been in a boat?" She went, "No." I didn't think you could get a wheelchair in a boat. They went, "No, we've got these special boats." She got in a boat. It terrified her. It was hard work, and she loved it. And she tells this wonderful story about the training, because the able-bodied and the Paralympic athletes train together, and they train just as hard, and they train to exhaustion, and they're sick at the end of the all this kind of stuff. And I said to her, how do you sustain that? Because we often talk about motivation and attitude. And attitude, you can have a great attitude, but if you're not motivated, it's nothing, And she said, when you leave later, because we did this conversation at her house, she said, just look on the back of my front door. She said, there's something on the front door that I look at and I see every time I leave the house. And I said, okay, fine. She said, because, there will be moments when your friends will say, do you want to come out for a drink, or do you want to? And she said, you want to, but at the same time, you're training next morning, or even you're out for a drink and they say, have another glass of wine, and you've got that kind of, temptation and all that kind of stuff. She said, but I look at that sign on the back of the door. Anyway, the conversation went in other directions an hour or so later as I was leaving, and there's a photo of her in her Olympic boat on the front door looking in, so you saw it as you left. And underneath the words, "Does it make the boat go faster?" And she said, when somebody says, "Do you want a glass of wine?" she said, I think to myself, does it make the boat go faster, or does it make the boat go slower? And the answer is it's going to make it go slower. She said, so if I want to go faster, I know the answer. I don't need to refer to anyone else or ask. I just ask myself 100 times a day, does it make the boat go faster? Now, you have that choice at that moment. If you're not bothered about going faster or making more money or selling more cars or whatever, have the extra glass of wine. You're entitled to. It's not slavery. It's not, have fun and, that in your life. But I thought that was one of those moments where you went, we've got all the evidence, all the KPIs that this is an amazing performance. Multiple gold medal winner and world record holder, and an incredible, lovely, generous person. So we've got those KPIs.
Yes.
And it all comes from that very, very simple statement.
With sport, I think, and we've touched on it already, but the beauty of sport is the incremental changes and influence that can be had are really relevant to performance outcomes because they're so targeted and so focused, and they're trained in at a very early level in someone's career in sport. When you transpose that into industry where people fall down, and using the example you've given, Jason, we've just at the time of this recording, we'll have just aired an interview with Luke Broad from Dacia, and he was talking about how things like PowerPoint presentations and things that contain data are important, but he doesn't want people to be spending hours on beautifying a PowerPoint deck because those people are worried about how it looks to the big boss. He's more concerned about the message and is it culturally right? And it's the same analogy really is if it doesn't influence the output in the right way, just ditch it. What's the point? It doesn't need to exist. You're making things more complicated than it needs to be, and it's not actually influencing the goal, the performance that we're looking for. So I think sport is so relevant, and we see that in a lot of L&D now. And underneath some of the programs we have in place here, we've got psychometric science, neuroscience, and behavioural science elements that really are driven from sports science. Yeah. Really, it's fundamental. So it is powerful.
I think the other thing about sport is that as an athlete going out there, one of two things will happen. You either win or you lose. I mean, okay, you can draw. But it means statistically, people in sport are very used to not getting the outcome they hoped for. But that doesn't mean their journey ends. And I think in business, it's, you can have a good meeting, you can have a good appraisal, you can equally have one that's less than you hoped for. Does that stop you in your stride? It shouldn't do. And I think that's a really great, you see a lot of people that, perform at whatever level in sport, doing well in life.
Yes.
Because they have this kind of attitude.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Like everything that you're saying about does it make the boat go faster? All the training that we get around that and all of the sports science, that is all about the mind and the body being connected. And so athletes will train knowing that. They will know that they will have, I've been a body worker. I've done massage, and I first started off working with professional athletes back in the States. They will not hang out with people that annoy them the day before a big match, because it will bring their energy down. So they'll look after not just what they're eating and how they're training, but they'll look at their entire environment to give them the best chance at winning. And then they'll take a loss, they'll feel it, then they'll use that to train into the next possible victory. And I feel like there's still so little of a basic assumption that that's how to be a human in any other aspect, like in business. Like I think I hear you saying there's such a culture of it didn't work, so I could just give up or flop or complain, as opposed to taking the information, right? Yeah. And doing what you said, Phil, like learning and developing and letting that be exciting. Yeah. There's so much in there. But there's so much for me exciting about any science that has to do with humans that are in a body. Yeah. Right? Like these are the meat sacks that we're walking around with.
Yeah, they are not mutually exclusive.
Right, exactly.
One has an effect.
And there's so much information that we have available to us.
Well, the computer that's powering all of this is the most powerful computer on the planet.
Right? Exactly.
And no one gave us a handbook. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some powerful studies there that do help us, and we won't do the shameless plugs just yet. We'll save that to the end. But in reality, there's a lot of science that you can use to understand a bit more about what your brain is doing, empowering it. But fundamentally, one of the key drivers and trends that we've seen across some of the chats we've had in Series 1 is having humility and empathy when leading teams and people, because you need to take a position of, I don't know everything. And Jim Saker actually said, the most powerful learning you can have as a modern day leader is knowing what you don't know. Is understanding what your gaps are and trying to find out how you can fill those gaps. But throughout the series, in Series 1, we've heard humility come up so many times. And I think that's a really powerful point, because if you want to develop and you want to be the best, you need to start from a position of, I can actually improve. It goes back to what we were saying earlier, Phil. Us as leaders ourselves, we need to think about how we develop ourselves and keep continuing to do that. So in your career and your start point, you were working back in the Henry Ford Academy.
That's right.
When you were working there, what was the sort of trends you were seeing in terms of leaders, and dynamically, how has that changed now?
I mean, the time I was there, we were still getting sales managers progressing through to dealer principal sort of roles. And yes, I know some service managers are dealer principals, but probably skewed slightly more towards the sales side of business. And actually, the sense of, okay, well, how are you going to lead a business as opposed to sell more cars as a key sort of message going through that took, I would say, years to really start to do that cultural shift where actually the role of that more senior leader within a business is more around how you lead your people as opposed to how do you achieve that KPI. Well, that's why I've got these other people within the business. That's their job. And I think one of the things I've sort of seen evolve with that is a better understanding now of what that role should be, and the skills that are needed to be able to do it, and the talent that's needed to be able to do it. And certainly with some of the programs that I'm involved with now, is part of the challenge is actually getting people who are in their particular world really senior. I mean, they've kind of reached the pinnacle of that part of the industry, and okay, well, how do I learn to do that better? And the really good ones, and most of the people we tend to work with are open to that recognition of, okay, how do I get more sophisticated as a leader of a business, but more a leader of people, despite the fact I've had this success already in my career, which was about achieving stuff and managing stuff, and now I'm managing people.
Managing operations. It's funny, isn't it?
It's very different.
My career as well, we've said it throughout the podcast, heavily automotive, spent a lot of time in the front line, and it's interesting that you see that shift from operational management to people and culture, and now you have divisions in organisations that focus on people and culture. And coming back to what you were saying earlier, you choose to work with people that see the value in you and understand your values, beliefs, and morals. What do you do when working with these clients to make sure you understand their DNA, but also leave enough of the door open to influence some change, cultural change?
I always, and it's dangerous to use the word always, right? Always, never.
Yeah, never
use the
always.
word always. Yeah, and that's a very interesting question to me because I've been investigating my own practice a bit lately. When you do the reflection, how did that go? Is that who I meant to be? I always come from a perspective of, you might call it humility. Sometimes I call it studentship. I'm there to study. I'm there to learn. And for me, the feeling of it is like wide open curiosity. And what's interesting to me, well, lots of things are, but right now, every measure of happiness, there's all these sort of scientific measures of, the happiest countries and how do you become more happy or sort of more resilient, all show that the most vibrant, resilient, happy creatures are curious. Curiosity is always a part of it. So when you talk about being humble, for me, that is part of the curiosity project. I can't be curious if I think I already know it. And Phil, I even noticed a slight thing of this language around, even though I'm already good at it, to be open to learning. There's this idea that we still have that by the time you reach expertise, you should relax about learning or stop being curious, when life is so complex and so fascinating. If you stop being curious, you might as well be dead.
But we must have all come across leaders or represented organisations where some of that ego exists. Some of the teams, they almost take themselves out of that equation because they say, we want you to influence culture and change, and we want you to be part of the L&D landscape, but we don't need to be part of that.
I've had so many people contact me and say, so you specialize in interpersonal communications. My team definitely needs help with that, but I don't need it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we all know what the story is.
I'll kick it
there,
off.
right?
I'll do the first 5 minutes.
Exactly.
I'll hand you over and I'll see you later. I'll do emails.
But so take it deeper. Then become humble and curious about when you get that little flicker of, this person is the problem, or I know what's going on. Stay curious about that.
Yeah.
And really investigate. That's why I love working in organizations that are really sort of global, because you have people from lots of different places saying, oh, well, recently I was working with someone who was based in Japan, in Japanese culture, and they were interacting with people from Eastern Germany. And they had communication concerns, you might imagine. And so I could go, well, I have all my sort of psychometrics and ways of reading culture and all my anthropological studies. All those tools are just to help me bring a vocabulary into the room so that we can be more curious together.
Yes.
So it's like the ROI or getting the right answer. If you understand it as we get to keep exploring, we get to keep discovering, then even my ego as the coach and trainer
Is open-minded.
And that kind of activates a sense of maybe emotional safety, as some of your previous
psychological
people,
safety,
right?
yeah.
So that people who have a big burden of leadership and feel like I can't be seen to be weak. However, I can celebrate curiosity, and then with me, we can walk forward and go, what else can we explore and learn? We still think that learning is a sign of weakness or failure.
I think that's
right?
such a really great point, and actually no better link to one of the episodes in series 1 is Jane Gurney, CEO of the local air ambulance trust. And Jane, I was bowled over with how down to earth, human and approachable she is, and her role denotes that of typically, and I'll be brave enough to say this, there's egos carried at that level a lot of the time. She was so humble, so approachable, and so curious to keep learning and be relevant, and was really getting the backing of the board to say, I need visibility, I need to be seen and heard.
I think the board probably, when you say the backing of the board, it almost feels like the board go, gosh, Jane is a really precious resource, let's use her. Do you know, I was watching Jane and I was thinking, I probably couldn't get a job with them. They probably wouldn't employ me, but I would love to work with her. Not as a coach or anything. I would just love to be part of that organisation because the values were so clear. They felt they were making a difference, which they clearly are. And it just felt like a really kind of happy place. I mean, the problem I have, if you like, is so many people talk about leaders and managers, and I don't think I met my first leader in business as an employee, until I've been working for about 15 years. I worked for some really good managers operationally. They knew how to run the business, and I thought that's what it was all about. Yeah, some of them were owners of those businesses, and then, in fact, it was probably even later than that. I'd probably been working close to 20 years, and I suddenly met this guy who ran this company that I worked for, and I went, that's what a leader is.
So he showed you what a leadership role was.
Yeah, he didn't take me aside and go, hey, this is how you do it. I was just observing a completely different way of operating,
What did you see?
Well, I saw a guy that was had an incredible plan, a strategy that he could explain to you over coffee or over the water cooler conversation or to the reception. You all felt aligned. It felt, those magnet things where you put it down and you get the iron fire. Yeah. So everybody felt on this journey. The other thing that I saw was he would kind of remember stuff, the micro stuff. So he'd remember where you went on holiday, or he'd remember your kid's birthday, he'd remember this. So he's utterly engaging. He had no ego about him at all. And you felt, and his name was Keith Foster. Some people watching this might know him. No longer with us. But he was inspirational, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And it was like discovering a new colour, Oh yeah, there's blue, there's orange, there's green, there's yellow. But how about this one? You go, oh wow! It really was that vivid. And from that moment on, I've looked out for those people, and you see them in the most unexpected places. And when people say, I want to become a leader, then it really is. It is quite different to being a manager, and not everyone wants to be a leader either. That's the other thing. No. There's nothing wrong with not being a leader. You have a football team, and one person will be a captain. It doesn't mean they're the best player. It might mean they're the best leader on the field, and the other guys or girls in that team don't actually want that role. So, for me, leaders are very valuable, very precious. They're not everybody. And when you're kind of in the presence of them, you kind of know.
Yes.
It's something special.
And that's really interesting. I mean, and I'd thought about this before we sort of met today, but your question around, okay, what is it they did? The person I'm thinking of, and you name checked yours, so I'll name check mine.
Please, yeah, no, they deserve it.
But her name is Vicky, and I was lucky enough to work within the team that she was running for quite a period of time, and it's really hard to be able to go, that's what she did, that's what she was doing. I just know that feeling of somebody who's got some very special capabilities and some very special skills in being able to unlock the talent within a team and let the talent within the team drive. And I'm here to, my job is to allow this team to use its talent to take the team
absolutely.
forward.
I remember once, sort of saying something to Keith and presenting it at a board meeting, and afterwards he took me aside. He said, the logic behind what you said and why you did it, and absolutely spot on. What you were saying, completely wrong, but I'll explain that to you later. And I was kind of half smiling and half grimacing. And then he sat me down and he ran me through it, and I went, yeah, absolutely. So he had no problem with his people kind of making mistakes because we were one step closer to getting it right.
It's the trust. It's the, listen, it's okay if you get things wrong. Learn from it.
They were their coaches, aren't they?
And
Some of the best leaders, they really know that.
But I think the other thing as well, that where I've certainly my own experience, not necessarily this table thumping, loud, overly personality led individual, just somebody who was, and actually some of the words we've heard previously, quite humble, quite reserved. The lack of ego that you've kind of touched upon that just isn't there. And I think the thing that stuck with me is I didn't think that was the type of person that I would find really inspirational and really somebody that I would see as great leadership. I'd maybe got a slightly, not old-fashioned sort of view, but a slightly traditional
sort of man on a horse, shield, big spear, follow me, chaps, you know. Yeah. But that's how
of course, that's
that's a leader, right?
What I'm looking for. And it certainly was one of those things of actually what, first couple of days within that team, in that environment, that sense of this is something I'm part of something very special.
And it's exciting, right?
And really exciting. Yeah. But trying to explain it and trying to be able to go, oh, it was that's what she did. I mean, even now, like 10, 15 years later, I'm still struggling to explain it.
Well, that's my whole thing. That's my geekiness. I'm like, let me go away and study all the things about humans so that I can begin to put some language around what it is.
Yeah.
Have you ever sat, now I'm doing Matt's job, have you ever sat inside the skin of leadership? Like, we're talking about leadership.
Sounds like Hannibal Lecter, sorry.
Yeah, a bit. But like, I'm curious now about, do you have an experience for yourself of being a leader in a way that maybe surprised you? Or like, how do you, like sitting alongside leaders and helping them, is having had an experience of your own sort of practice of leadership, what does that feel like when you know it's going well?
And that's really interesting. It's one of those things where you try to pick these things up from the great people that you meet and that you get to work with, and in lots of different industries and lots of different business segments. And it's that, and the good and the bad. There's that sense of, right, how do I get to be like her? I don't want to be like him. And in terms of putting those things into practice myself and using that within, my own sort of team and my own world, I know I'm consciously aware that I'm doing it because it's not for me a natural way of being or necessarily a natural skill. So I have to practice this type of stuff. And I still go through the usual fear of lack of control and, hang on a minute, is it all going to go well? No, I trust people. I'm going to let them get on with it. If it doesn't go quite right, we'll find a way of fixing it afterwards. So the fear is still there, the tension's still there, the nerves are still there, but consciously, no, I'm going to let people do what they're really good at, what they're really amazing at. But they know I'm there if they need some support.
But doing that very thing, Phil, you're giving those people that work for you the same feeling that this great boss
and again,
Vicky
I think
gave
it's that trying to replicate in a way that isn't necessarily a natural skill. I can't remember who we had the conversation with before, but it was the usual thing about, some, leaders born or made.
Yes.
And I think the answer is both. I think some people do have some natural tendencies and capabilities within themselves as individuals where they're just really good at that unlocking the talent of others. And I think some people need to learn it. And they can learn it if, coming back to what you were saying earlier, they're open-minded to
staying
actually,
curious.
I want to be able to do it. And that curiosity of, I'm very good at running this business of whatever business this is, selling, doing whatever it is that we do. How do I get better? And how do I be better at that? And the operational stuff, I can't go into the widget factory and help them make widgets better and faster. That's not, I don't see that as my sort of role as a coach. The people who know how to make widgets better are the people who are doing it. It's that, okay, well, how are you going to get your people and your team?
And Marion Whitty mentioned this in episode 1 when she worked with the local constabulary, a rather large one, which we can't name for other reasons, but she worked with a rather large police constabulary, and she mentioned that they obviously had the process down, of course, because there's huge amounts of training behind the scenes for that, and having spent a bit of time in that role myself, it is intense, and you learn that role and you are expected to know that inside out on a daily basis. What you don't get in the policing world is coaching. And what she offered and her team offered was that coaching, that stuff that you can't always put a label on. Yeah. It's a bit like that sort of Maya Angelou quote of, it's not the words that have been said, it's how people are left feeling, isn't it? It's that kind of vibe. Yeah. And what she did really well was manage the cultural part. And she talked about how creating the mental health first aiders, recognizing the coaching requirements, creating those moments of space so that you can have an open dialogue were some of the keys to success in the policing world, but across all industry as well. And I think that for me is the things that stand out in a great leader. And that's that, what you said earlier, Jason, that distinction between an operational manager and a leader. Yeah. They suddenly dial into the stuff that you can't describe. You can't put your finger on all the time, but there's something, there's an aura about them that makes you go, wow.
Yeah. But one of the things I sort of see and read quite a lot is leadership good, management bad. And it's like, well, no. Actually, what we need is both. Yeah. But we need people to be good at both. You can have people who take on this leadership sort of approach, and they're really, really.
Is there a word called managership?
That's really bad at it.
It's a bit of both.
And then
we invented a new word.
And it's that. And I find myself having this conversation sort of quite frequently of yes, leadership as a style and a way of working, and fine, yeah, but do it well.
Yes.
But also we need people who are really good at doing the management stuff.
Absolutely.
So do that, but do it well.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I find myself helping sort of people with is their experience of being on the receiving end of both being done really badly. And okay, well, how do we change that? What would we do differently to make sure that we don't replicate those behaviours or those ways of working?
Well, both roles require huge amounts of people management and people process. And, that's, again, why HR teams exist. You need framework around how to look after people and support them. And no matter what the role is, whether it is by title or definition a management position or a leadership position, people are at the heart of all of that. And you need to understand how to get the best out of them.
But interestingly, and this might be contentious for anybody watching or listening, but one of the things that this great leader Keith did, he said to me, we will never have an HR department. They had over 200 people in the company. And I was like intrigued by that. He said, because often what happens in organisations when you have this dedicated HR role is everybody abdicates responsibility for the people they work with, the teams, this kind of stuff. And it really kind of set my mind thinking. And I've seen, since that statement, I've seen lots of organisations where that is a very, very real problem because the managers think, well, hey, that's an HR issue, or the MD or the CEO or whatever, the senior people, oh, well, that's a management issue. And it just gets kind of kicked down the alley,
Yeah, I get that. It's a great point, actually, Jason, because you're right. And
I'm not sorry if you're an HR person listening to this.
No, we love you.
We love you.
We need you.
But it asks an interesting question.
I think one of the things, certainly, I'm thinking of some of the people that I've sort of worked with over the past few years, is actually I'm finding a lot of HR teams are saying exactly that, of their role isn't to deal with it. Their role is to advise and give guidance.
Yeah.
It's the people
They're
who,
being misused, really, effectively.
and actually it's that frustration of, okay, well, how do we help our frontline people get better at looking after their people? We're there to help advise and give guidance on, okay, well, this is how you would handle that situation. But we are not there to handle that situation ourselves because we're not there on the shop floor or on the factory floor or wherever it is. So we can't be responsible for that type of stuff. And I think it's too easy for people to abdicate that responsibility for the really tricky stuff with around the people side of things. I also find myself coming from a perspective of L&D, is actually that's also what we are there to help with, is that sense of, okay, well, if your people don't know how to have those conversations or do that sort of thing, then we're to help with that. I see it on every manager's job description. It will be the word coaching.
Yes.
You're there to coach your people, and it's like, okay, and when have you ever been shown how to do that?
Yeah.
And no, never. It's like, okay, well,
hardly surprising you find it tricky.
That's why you're going to find it hard. But that
keeps us in a
piece,
job, though, doesn't it?
Well, there is that. But interesting, it's that accountability piece and that personal accountability piece, I think for me is absolutely huge.
Yeah.
I was working recently with a small company that's growing very, very quickly, and they quite literally said to me, we have to get an HR department. And coming from a very curious place, I could make lots of assumptions as to, after 20 years of being in this kind of work and thinking of what that meant. But instead I said, what are they going to do for you?
Yeah.
And it very quickly became clear that they were intending to outsource what their own human work could be. And if they kept HR for, the things that legally HR is good for, and didn't abdicate response, they were already sort of pre-deciding, kind of like, when I get married, my wife will do the laundry. One day I'll be able to stop doing the stuff that I don't want to do.
I really find this difficult and painful, so I'm going to get married. I'm going to get
exactly,
HR.
As opposed to how fascinating. One of the things I love to ask people when they're up in it and against it and there's too many things going on, which of these things that if you could get excited about learning it is going to make the rest of your life better? Like, instead of being incomplete, like, I wish someone else would take care of it. And we need each other, right? We're a constellation of things, and we all need each other to help do things. But to also get excited about how you get to grow as a human, and then how that brings it back to the business and the company. And part of growing as a human is knowing where your sweet spot is. There's a lot of people I've met who don't want to be leaders. They want to be managers. They love managing people.
Yeah.
They want support managing people better. In that way, maybe they're leading, they're creating a culture that allows the more visible leadership to do its job, But even saying what I don't want to do and what I do want to do as a human being and bringing that into the workspace.
I think that's a really
positive
positive thing. By the way, I actually quite like ironing.
Yeah.
And this sounds
it's very meditative.
It's very meditative. 5 or 6 business shirts is about my limit because my back starts to go.
I work with the total gender role thing.
There's a deep satisfaction, because my son wears a shirt every day and he goes out the door and I go, yeah, we've nailed that again, Charlie.
It's nice.
But that's important.
I outsource it.
So there you go. But to your point, this thing sometimes, I don't know if everybody in this room feels this, but sometimes there's that moment you go, am I really adding value? I've been working with someone recently who multi-million pound business, started it from scratch, incredibly successful. And I look at that person and go, I could never be them. Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't do what they've done. So where am I adding the value? And what comforts me is about 15 years ago, I worked with a guy called Andy Walsh. Andy Walsh was director of performance for Red Bull, the drinks company. And he was basically responsible for, they sponsor athletes around the world in all sorts of things. Obviously they're in F1, but it's things like snowboarding, surfing, motocross, all those extreme things, the wing things and go around buildings and whatnot. Anyway, And his opening line to me, because it was an automotive project, he said, "I know nothing about selling cars or running dealerships." And there was a kind of a pause in the room, like, have we got the wrong guy? He said, "But I do know about how to maximize individual performance to world-class levels. Would you like me to show you how to do that?"
Yeah.
And there was that moment of, because he said to me, "Listen, I can't surf as good as my guys. I can't, I can't ride a motocross as good as that girl. I can't, but I'm not pretending to. What I'm doing is I'm trying to help them with some of those little roadblocks, knock down some of those doors, get them to step to one side and look at it from a different angle."
Yes.
And that's what I think all the time. And that word curiosity, when I'm sat with a client, a customer, call them what you will, and they're doing something I know I couldn't do and wouldn't want to do maybe, but I'm curious as to why or how they could do it even better.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because Becky Webber said in her episode, actually, you need to get to a place where you can almost make yourself redundant.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to step away. Yeah. But to do that, you've got to create opportunity and moments. And in the build up to that, it's about having time to reflect, to even evaluate where you are. Because you're so in the midst of the operation, you don't have those moments to think, what is my focus? Where do I need to guide the team? And where do I let go? It's really tough. But I think what we're saying here is the curiosity is what drives that performance. And actually, it's a common theme throughout. We've seen it and heard it in all the episodes. Our dealings with clients and services is that the most powerful leaders are taking the time to really understand our operation. Whether they have the skill set for the end line or not, what they're really good at is evaluation of their operation and their people and saying, well, if I need support, I can get it. And I think what my experience in certain roles has meant I've been part of HR teams. And so we've had that dialogue
Sorry,
about...
Matt, when we...
No. It's really interesting because... No.
That was awkward.
It's really interesting because you absolutely hit the nail on the head. My L&D roles in that department, extension of that department, was initially quite transactional because people would come to us and say, well, we need help with a training course or we need coaching for this person. Can you deal with it? That's fine. That works to an element. You with an operation or a task, fine, we can do that transaction. But the really powerful learnings and the continued development of people came from the partnering relationships. And it's of no surprise that those roles became business partners as opposed to HR or people managers. And that was the transition where we started to see really good managers of departments or leaders with a vision. And they said, people are our absolute hub within this operation. So let's focus on them, let's develop them, and let's give them all the skills and support they need to be the best of the best.
Yeah.
And when they switched on to that, they're using all these resources around them. Suddenly the game is changing and they're winning and they're starting to see their people being loyal and staying with the operation. And they're going home feeling like you felt, Phil, and we've all been there, I've been there. You go, what is it that made that a great day? I don't know, but I want to go to work tomorrow to find out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, for me, is where you see the most amount of change. And it is really when people dial into that. I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to get the right people around me and I'm going to keep staying curious and I'm going to keep pushing the department. And it's just doing that through the coaching and support. So it's interesting what you said about managers and leaders, and I'm with you, Phil. I'm sort of in the middle of it because I don't think a lot of people really know that distinction.
No.
Yeah.
And it's possibly because when you look at the job market, it's not very clear, is it? Titles don't often reflect the actual role. But I think what I'd be interested to know is, again, come back to your experience, what's the most powerful learning you've either seen or delivered when it comes to changing culture or changing performance in a manager? What's really stood out? Positive, negative, in the middle? What do you think's really been an eye-opener?
I've been lucky enough to run some really powerful programs over the past few years, and with high caliber, high-performing individuals within their sort of respective sort of industry, and the real positive has actually been having those really senior people who were maybe a little bit not uncomfortable coming along, but it's a mandatory program. You've got to come along and do it. Oh yeah, okay, I'll get the box ticked and I'll do all that type of stuff. and then actually seeing them getting the value out of their time being invested in investing in themselves, and as facilitators helping them unlock that talent in themselves. And what I've learned from that has been actually seeing the skill of that curiosity mindset, that open mindset in senior people who are prepared to be put through a little bit of pain in terms of growing and developing and going into some uncomfortable areas about their own sort of blind spots and the things that actually, it turns out I'm not as good as that as I want to be or need to be. The value that they have then said that they got out of that, and the emphasis is very much on them taking responsibility to grow themselves and learn new stuff and take it on board. You can't force them; they don't have to do it. But as a learning experience, actually seeing that sort of playing out in front of you over a number of years and seeing the growth in those individuals becoming more sophisticated in their abilities to unlock the talent of their people around them. For me, as the person who's delivering it, I've learned so much from the delivery of it to other people around. Right, that's how I need to be. That's what I need to adopt and kind of live and breathe this type of stuff myself, in order to then sort of pass it on and cascade it down.
I love those moments because I've worked with some programs when I was with Mercedes-Benz. The managing director of one of the big entities, he was heavily involved in a cultural change program that we ran over three years, and he became the face of it. But what was so powerful about that was he absolutely lived and breathed all the values and morals. He was there, front line, demonstrating it day in, day out, staying curious, asking the right questions, challenging the HR department on how to be better and how we could do more. And I think, again, it just leaves you this lasting impression of, we're in this together. A true leader had a vision, wants to take the business forward and leave it in a better position than it came to him with. And I think that people like that, for me, are the guiding light of, right, that's what we're all seeking. We want to make people feel good, turn up for work, feel good about what their contribution is. And that's only made possible through what we do, the work we do, and supporting and giving people that space. So, I mean, Phil, you've got a really long career, as all of us here. Jason.
You're not that old, Phil.
We've seen
I
a
mean,
lot.
really, mate, it's because you're still up. I mean, it's time for a snooze, isn't it?
But we've all started from beginnings in, working for people. We've given an example where we've had to work for some managers and leaders. Jason, you've just talked about Keith, who, off the top of your head, was the person to go to.
Yeah.
In your early career, you were selling cars and working in retail as well, garages back then, and dealers, as we were talking about earlier.
Yes,
the language
call
has
them
changed.
Garages. Didn't have fuel pumps, so they're garages, definitely.
Your insights from your early career, is there anything, we don't need to name anybody, but is there anything that you identified in your very early years and you thought, that's something that actually I don't want to do, and you continue through your career?
Yeah, there was plenty of things you go, really? I don't think that's a good tactic to adopt. So I suppose, some people, we know from the psychology, some people move towards, some people move away. What I mean by that is, you'd say to a customer, how much do you want to spend a month? Some people would say, I'd get a 300 quid a month, and other people would say, I don't want to spend more than 300 quid a month. One was telling you where they would go to, others would tell you what they were kind of avoiding. And some people are wired up that way. So I had plenty of experiences of discovering things I didn't want to do. I didn't want them to become my behaviours or my habits because I thought that they were ineffective or wrong or, whatever. And that does kind of build a picture. What's wonderful, obviously, is when you see people that are doing things that you go, wow, yeah, I want to do more of that. I want to be more like them. But to be perfectly honest, it felt quite late in my life, not in my life, but it was a good 10, 15 years in before I guess I found someone inspiring.
Right.
Yeah. And there weren't podcasts back then. So you had to pick up a book by what was he, Zig Ziglar or whatever, or
Yeah.
all those, that's right, all those books, and put a tape in your tape player, and you can do this, son, and think the best and all that. Whoa! But that was the only inspiration, and I was an American, still aren't, so I wasn't really aligned to that kind of way of thinking, So it was kind of hard.
Don't blame
I'm not having a go. Oh God, I'm offended. Age, HR, But yeah, it's a joy when you find someone that you can go, wow, I love what they do, and I want to be kind of a bit more like them, if you like, So early days, it was a bit tricky. I'm not saying they were bad people. I'm just saying that they operated in a way that I didn't think was necessarily. I probably, I learned things, smile, shake hands, ask the right questions, all that kind of stuff. So, the fundamentals of meet and greet and qualify and demonstrate and present and all that was all there, and that was all good. And that's all I thought there was, really. I wasn't seeing any glimpses of leadership. But then when you meet someone that does it, you go, wow. And it's one thing, isn't it, take a lesson for yourself and you go, oh yeah, I've kind of learned that. But when someone is also exposed to that lesson, you see it I'll tell the story. So you've probably all heard of Fred Syriacs, okay? So I've known Fred for a number of years. I knew him when he was running his restaurant in London, Galvin at Windows. And we worked together on a program, and he shared with me these stories. So they have these things like the 5 smiles. Every customer gets 5 smiles before they get to the
Gazelles
table.
on Red Bull.
Gazelles on Red Bull, all this kind of stuff. And I had that explained to me after I'd been through the experience. So he kind of almost deconstructed it. He almost took the magic away, because I went, that's what you were doing. It was an amazing, amazing thing. My daughter was lucky enough to work there for a summer when she was 18 in the restaurant. And she would come back with these amazing stories. And she lived in London for 3 months. She had to get the tube up and all this kind of, it was really hard work for her. But she came back so motivated, so pumped up. She then went into hospitality, and I remember one evening she came home. So this is about a year later, and she had the most enormous blister on her foot. She'd worn new shoes, and she'd gone and done this shift, and she took her shoe off. It was like something an SAS man would cry over. I mean, it was the size of your palm. And I went, Poppy, that must hurt. She went, yeah. I said, when did that happen? She said, I could feel it happening at about 6 o'clock, start of the shift. And I said, well, how did you go through? She said, whenever I'm having a tough time, she said, I look across the room, the dining room, and I imagine I can see Fred stood there, and I can hear his words. And he says, 5 smiles, Poppy, 5 smiles. Gazelle on Red Bull. And she said, I smile, and I go again. And at that moment, I thought, yeah, I've sat with him, and I've understood that, and I've experienced it. But he's inspiring. That's true leadership. He's inspiring this person that kind of didn't have the background stuff that I'd had from Fred. And I saw it working, and that transformed her life, because she's still in hospitality. She's 30 now. She's working very, very high end. She works in France, but it's those little micro experiences that change the way you think about life and what's possible, and that you carry with you forever. And that, to me, he remains. Again, I've mentioned Helene, I've mentioned Keith, Andy. Fred is right up there. He's the real deal. He is a true leader,
Yes. It's interesting. We've had 6 episodes in series 1, and we've had a real mix of different experiences. But as we've already talked about, so many common themes throughout. But something that I thought was really interesting was a discussion with Mike Johnston of TOMD, and he was taking the reflection moment and talking about, actually before we started recording, he was talking about his career and how things had built out with the team, and he was saying he didn't want to be a managing director. He had no vision of that at the start of his career. He just, obviously wanted to have a great business and have a performing team. And during the podcast, you will remember he said, I probably didn't take it seriously till about the first 5 years. And I thought that was really interesting, because when do you, as an individual, when does one recognize that you're not doing it at your best? So we've talked about the examples you've seen, that they're almost doing it by virtue. They're continuing to do it well, and you almost think they're a natural born leader, as you said earlier. They just got it. Whereas Mike was saying, I probably didn't have it, but I recognised it, and then about you do 5 years
about it,
and then you do something about it.
But it's that, okay, when do I recognise? I know my own sort of experience, and I know lots of people have done it when going self-employed or working for yourself, I think in common with a lot of people, I fell into it. It was never on my plan or list to kind of do that. And I think for the first sort of 6 months, I could afford to do it, okay? But then there comes a point of, well, listen, if I'm going to do this, do it properly. Stop applying for jobs. Stop looking on job boards, and look at your business. Focus on that. Focus on what you're going to do, and if you're going to do it right, do it properly. And actually, it was really interesting listening to Mike talking about that. Where, never wanted to be the managing director. I was like, yes, I remember that. But actually, that process of going through it, and I do think whatever it is you do, if you're going to do it properly. Do
and
it
our
right.
message to Mike is, if only you'd applied yourself, you could run Apple or Amazon now.
But
I loved it. I loved that
I don't
honesty.
think,
It was
but
brilliant.
again, it's the honesty of it. I really don't think Mike. I loved it. I don't think he'd want to, but I think that sense of no, because actually this is more important, and I'm happy doing this, and actually this is where I wanted to get the business to be, and I've got these good people around me who are doing what they're meant to be doing, responsible for that. But yes, that when does that moment sort of occur where it's okay, I'm not doing this as well as I could be, and I think it's really hard to have that realization yourself. It's a lot easier to have somebody else come along and tell you you're not doing it well enough, or you're not doing it.
But it's not enough fire in your belly.
It's not enough. You've got to really want to. But I think that comes back to the accountability piece, the responsibility piece. Whatever it is I'm doing, I want to be as the best version of me doing that I can be.
I remember when I'd been selling cars about 6 or 7 years. Moved from Cornwall up to Berkshire, and then moved into London. And anyway, the long story short, my life was that I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning. I'd listen to the farming thing on Radio 4 that's on about I knew all about grain prices doing the commute into London. And I'd get into London about 7:30, shower and shave, go have a sauna, go to the gym, all that, so I could be in work ahead of the traffic. So I'd get into work about 8:30. We generally finish about 6:30, depending on what the traffic was like. We were on the Bow Road in East London. And then I'd drive home, which was Farnham in Surrey. So I was leaving home at kind of 5:30, so up at about 5, and getting home about 8:30 in the evening. Back in the day, Sundays were a really good day to sell luxury cars, because the Sunday Times had all the classified when they were in print. So I'd always work a Sunday. Saturdays were pretty good as well, because you'd often get a lot of appointments. So I'd take every other Monday off. So I worked 13 days on and 1 day off. And it was 5:30 or 5 in the morning till 8:30 at night. And I remember I was kind of average. I wasn't the top salesperson. I wasn't the worst. In grade terms, I was probably a C. And then I realized that a grade C is the worst of the best and the best of the worst. It's kind of in the middle. And I looked at what I was earning. It was okay. But I thought, why am I spending? And I added up the hours. I was spending like something ridiculous. 90 hours a week doing that, and about 6 hours a week with my family. I wanted to be the best dad, son, all that sort of stuff, and I was only putting 5 or 6 hours to it. So why would I want to do something all those other hours and just be average? And I was 30, so I wasn't a kid, but it was that moment when I thought, if I'm going to dedicate this much time to it, I'm going to work really, really, really hard. And if that happens to someone when they're 12 or 16, when they do their GCSEs, fantastic. It hasn't got to. And it might happen when you're 40. But for me, that was that moment when you went, you're playing at this. You've got to make a decision like you did, Phil. You can carry on playing at it, or you can really apply it.
And actually, one of the sort of thoughts before we sort of came along today was around, okay, best bit of feedback you've had, or those sort of things. And one of the people that I was lucky enough to work for in my career, it was quite an influential character, is Trevor. And one of the things he tasked me with is to challenge mediocrity, because it's too many businesses.
Well, globally, I mean, that's a big job, isn't it?
in too many businesses, in too many locations, it's accepted of, okay, well, we'll accept that. He said, well, you need to challenge that in order to, encourage, guide, tell, force people to be better. And so one of the things that I was sort of tasked with was doing a sort of a group role where I'm there to drive performance and across quite a wide group, and this constant sort of push of, okay, well, what are we accepting and what is acceptable in terms of standards of performance and ways of working. And it wasn't just about bottom line stuff or KPI stuff. It was around doing the right things right and doing the right things and all that sort of stuff for a particular German brand that has very high standards and very high expectations. and actually that sense of, okay, well, what does excellence look like? How do we strive for that? And you get some people who are up for it, and you get some people who aren't. It's like, okay, well, what are you going to do with those? And what do we do with those people? And it's like, well, they've got to want to do it. Whether they've got the capability, that's this next conversation. They've got to be up for it, got to want to do it. And I remember quite a few uncomfortable conversations that he had with me of, well, are you the best? Are you the best at what you do? Do you want to be the best at what you do? And I'll be like, yeah, really do. Well, show me. Come on, what do you need from me in order to help you to get to be the best of what you can be? And then sort of cascade those type of behaviours down. And some people were up for it and some people weren't.
Yeah.
Whether they were capable of being able to do it, okay, well, we'll help you with that. We'll give you some tools to help you with that.
But the flip side is you'll get those people that are capable, don't want to do it.
Who don't want to do it. And it's like, well, okay, well, what conversation do we have with those people who've got the capability, but...
Yeah.
And it's that, and the way he used to phrase it was, it's that acceptance of being mediocre.
And there's always going to be a dynamic in a team where there are people performing really well, high potential, the people in the mid-ground doing a lot of the lugging, and then you've got people who are underperforming. But the role of the manager or the leaders is creating a culture where we embrace that dynamic and we raise the bar somewhat. And we've all got experience of doing that. I think, again, my career, I've seen many, many times people in those leadership roles focusing on the people with the high potential, or that's deemed as high potential, and not necessarily dedicating enough of those moments to those that could be just lifted a touch, that are hugely impactful.
You've reminded me of a very funny story. There's a guy called Len Hunt who used to be the MD of Audi in the UK. Great on his feet. First time I'd ever seen him sort of present. And it was 97 when Audi went through this brand reinvention. So the A4 came out, the Audi 100 became an A6 and then an A8. And we know where Audi are today. But I remember seeing him do this presentation to the dealer body. And it was all about these amazing product plans. And Len walked around the audience, no auto cue, catching people's eyes, tapping them, going, oh, good to see you, Phil. Genevieve, not seen you for a while. As he's speaking, and the room was hanging on his every word. And I was inspired. I mean, I wasn't even an Audi dealer. I was just there because we were going to work with them. And he painted this picture of, the vanguard. He said, the vanguard. He said, imagine a train, and we're going to be at the vanguard of, prestige and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And he said, you want to be on that train. You want to be at the vanguard of what the industry's doing, da-da-da-da. Or do you see yourself in the guard's van at the back? And there was a silence in the room. And he said, because, I won't do his accent, because he had a lovely northerner accent. He said, because we will at some point, ladies and gentlemen, pull the pin and leave you behind. And collectively you saw the whole room sort of shuffle over into the vanguard. But it was a good point, because sometimes in development you've actually got to say, do you know what? This person's not right. They're not enjoying it. Yeah. We're kind of not enjoying it. And really we should go in a different direction. Because otherwise you're giving lots of resource and lots of attention to the people that don't want it. And the people that are craving it are kind of looking at you going, hang on,
I'm here.
Come over here, help me. I would really appreciate it. Yeah. And again, I think that's one of those conversations that sometimes you just got to say that the fit's not quite right. They're a wonderful human being. I'm sure their family and parents love them, but at this moment, they should go and perhaps do something else and kind of find themselves, But the way he expressed it, I just thought was lovely, because he absolutely had the audience, and everybody in that audience then decided where they wanted to be on that train. And he gathered them up and he led them, and well, we all know what happened to that brand. So he was incredibly charismatic and very successful.
And responsible for huge transformation. And I guess when you go home in that role, you've done a good day's work when you've transformed the entire culture and perspective.
Yeah, I think with someone like him, and with most great leaders, they never go home and go, nailed it today, job done. They probably go home and said, I think that had a bit of resonance. I think a few people got it. And they'll go back and they'll say, what could I have done differently? I don't think a great leader ever feels satisfied. We talk about downtime and relaxing and that. So all the great leaders I've been lucky enough to spend time with or observe or whatever, they very rarely switch off. Even when they go on holiday, they'll take, I think we had Jane, was it said she takes a business book and a novel, because it's quite nice to, occasionally. Yeah. And if they do switch off, it's because they switched off and doing something that still occupies their mind. So, I think, again, another trait of leadership is that they have to kind of be engaged in something.
The emotional intelligence of these individuals is so high because they are focused on so many facets of life, and they're interested in things that can impact them in a personal and a business sense.
Yes.
And, you do a lot of work in this area, don't you?
Will it make the boat go faster? But yeah.
You spend a lot of time working in that space as well, looking at people's mentality to life as well as work.
Absolutely. I mean, that's my jam.
Yeah.
So it's funny because what you were talking about in terms of the image of a great leader as someone who sort of never switches off except to restore themselves so they can go back to doing the thing that they are leading in. There's something in there that's really beautiful, but also a bit problematic, right? Like the idea that in order for me to be a great leader, it has to be all of my life. And I think some of the work that I get to do with people who are either thrust into leadership roles and trying to figure out if they have the capability, if they really want to be a leader in that space, or if they have a different arrangement with the mission of the work, is a sense of, we were talking about this before we started this podcast, is the sense of identity. It's the question of that's been going around the room this last time around. For me, I've been listening to your stories and your anecdotes, and I'm astounded as I think about it, how many examples I get to have because of the work that I get to do of witnessing people come into their own truth, right? There was an example of one guy. I've worked in many global financial, super aggressive institutions where there's a particular culture of you're in it, it takes everything, including your family life, or you're not going to succeed. And that's a total lie. I'm calling BS on that completely. You get to decide who you are. So there was someone in sort of middle management, and he was very frustrated with how the leadership above him was working. It's, I signed up for this particular job in this organization because I believed in certain things, and it's not what I thought it was. And he was so angry and heartbroken and was kind of crossing his arms and refusing to play. So he was a problem, which is why they called me. And what was interesting was all I did was basically give him space to speak his truth about all the things that he was having a tantrum about, and then ask him, did he want to do something about it? Or did he want to stay where he was? Of course he wanted to do something about it. That's the right answer, isn't it? You don't go, no, I want to stay in this uncomfortable place and just keep pouting for the rest of my life. So what are your options? One was to get out. And, in organizations that are really clear about what they're doing, people will take themselves out. If you're going to pull the pin and I don't want to be on the vanguard, then that's my moment of truth. And I get to set myself free and go where I'm a better fit. I think it's really important to acknowledge it's not just good for the organization, it's good for everybody to have that clarity.
It's uncomfortable for them. You don't want to...
just admit that this isn't who you really are or who you want to be. But this guy, literally, I watched him go from being a complete victim, very unhappy, mad at everybody that had any power because they weren't using it correctly. In one sentence, he went, oh, I can spend the next 3 years learning how to be a leader, and then I can make it better. Because he did have such a love for the organization and the people that he worked with. And 3 years later, he was the guy.
Wow.
And it came from such a place of truth and honesty.
Yeah.
You know, I think that, and then I have someone who I'm working with right now, and I'm going to name drop, and you all won't know her, but her name is Sylvia Petretti. She's the CEO of an organization that she's been with for over 20 years. She started off as a frontline worker. She never wanted to be a leader, but she wanted the organization to keep doing its good work in the world. And every time that she looked up, her personal growth and development was aligned to taking this thing forward. I guess it's kind of like being a parent or something. Like, you have to develop as a parent as your children develop. And one day they're adult children in the world, and you have to learn how to be a different kind of parent in the world, right? If you want to stay in relationship to it. So her identity changed with that. And all of the personal work that she does, just her own spiritual beliefs, her own relationships, she doesn't necessarily always choose them to run the organization better, but she chooses them to become a better version of herself, and that makes her the best possible leader. I think the most important part is her utter transparency. She uses me in coaching to get good language around what are you doing? Like we were talking earlier about leaders need to take time to make space, to think a little bit, because you're always responding and you're always, you need to be the storyteller that says, hey, everybody, I know you're really busy. Let me just remind you, this is where this boat is going.
Yeah.
Right? It's going over there because we want to discover something new. There's a few storms. If you're not telling that story, someone else is telling it, and it's not as good a story.
Yeah.
But to do that storytelling, you have to have time to sit and think and contemplate and make, and whatever that is. And I think that's what we bring in when we come in with our expertise, we're that space to go, let's take a minute and breathe and think about who you want to be. My father said to me, always be exactly who you are.
Yeah.
And if you take that into all of your decision making, it's up to you to decide who you're going to be.
Well, authenticity it is a phrase that it becomes a bit of a buzz phrase, unfortunately, in the corporate world. But at the heart, the essence of that and the definition of it is very, very true.
Yeah.
You've got to stay true to who you are. The people that are around you and will stay with you when you lead buy into who you are at the heart.
Yeah.
They're not interested in false stories and lies and false promises. They want the real deal, and they want, as you've experienced with Keith, people to be honest and say when you're doing a great job, but also take you to one side and say, I can make you better in that area and support you to grow and be better. And you'll always remember those moments. And I've had plenty of them myself. And you think that is what's missing in a lot of the organizations. And it just takes a moment of reflection and the power of people like us to open the door, open a line of communication and vocabulary. I love that. It's so true. You make the language accessible. You make the person accessible then. Yeah. And then through the power of some of the science and behavioral stuff, we can really identify the key ingredients and suddenly say, do you know why you're failing in this area? Because you've got too many people like you, or you haven't got enough of this type of individual that can bring the dynamic up. And suddenly you've got this winning recipe, and it comes back to, it's sports science.
Yeah.
The best performers we know of are these that are training day in, day out, being coached. They might be the best footballer in the world, the best rugby player. They still turn up for training every time. They know and have respect for their coach and know that they have information that can empower them to be the best of the best in the next game. That's all we're asking, isn't it? And the leaders recognise that. And
I think that, I love sitting down with Genevieve. Right? Because I do, you know this, because it's, the other thing, I don't consider myself a leader because I'm not running a big organisation or whatever day to day, but for leaders, it's very difficult to sit down around even with your directors because you're vulnerable. Stuff can be turned around and used against you. So with Genevieve, I can talk to you. It's a really safe space. And again, I know that's a kind of one of those phrases.
Yeah, but it's an important.
But it's really important
around,
because I can be vulnerable. I can ask a question because I don't know the answer. I can have moments of realization. And for me, it's genuinely kind of relaxing.
Yeah.
Because although it's self-improvement, it doesn't feel like, in that moment, it doesn't feel like hard work. It feels like insights. And that, that's why they'll go away, and the time they spend with you, Genevieve, or Phil, or
you,
Matt,
Jason.
or me, but will only be a fraction of their week, their day, their month, whatever. But it's those little interventions, I think, that give you time to kind of breathe a bit more deeply, and then go and do what you do and do it brilliantly. Because that's, I don't think anybody or very few people turn up to work and don't want to do a great job.
Nobody goes into work thinking, how can I do a really bad job?
Exactly. And if you start at that point and say, look, everybody wants to be the best they can be,
But they don't know.
but don't necessarily know how.
Do I do that?
And that's
And I think that's the point of,
and it's not taught at school, right? I mean, I've got two older daughters, they're 30 and Charlie's 16. He's just been through the GCSEs. They taught them the syllabus and all that kind of stuff. Didn't teach them anything about, how to learn, how to retain information, and even how to do an exam properly. They did plenty of mocks, but one of the conversations I had with Charlie was be focused. Because again, this is where great leaders are great at what they do. Utter focus on what they're doing in that moment. So I'd say to Charlie, it's history today. You go, yeah, and it's English tomorrow. Forget English tomorrow. You can't do anything about that. It's tomorrow. In history, just focus on history. Just think history. Don't think what you're doing after school or be absolutely focused in the moment. But that's not a conversation they have at school. Now, if that raised his performance by 2 or 3%, that might be a grade. It might be the difference between a pass and a fail. But that's enough to have made a significant difference.
Yeah,
and this is the stuff that...
I would love to live in a world where the work that we do is not necessary, where people have learned that part of being a human being is to be actively curious, is to be interested in your own internal mental processes, is to learn how to learn. That, imagine if the institutions that we went through that formed us in our young years taught us about personal resilience, taught us about the fact that not everybody has to have a certain job to be successful, that there's a genuine diversity in what joy and happiness and even things like these days there's a business model that's known as a social enterprise where part of your ROI is what you're doing for the community. Why is that only now coming into our common vocabulary? Wouldn't it be wonderful if our services were just a part of what happened in regular life in institutions, and we could,
We're dealing with,
we
as
could
we
do other
said
things.
earlier in the conversation, highly complex computers up here. And, we're talking with John Finn on episode 6, and obviously the work he supports us with behind the scenes, the reality of the brain is we're still under development.
Oh, yeah.
There's still so much information we don't know, and there's so much up here that isn't necessarily fully understood and can be poorly advised on. But what we do know is our operations in business and our personal lives are formed around habit creation. And we do things through routines and habits, and some of those are unhelpful habits that are stored in the brain and deeply rooted that we can recall them at an instant. And the negative thoughts we have and the unhelpful thoughts we have can be recalled incredibly quickly and be very damaging on everybody we have a touch point with. And what I found really interesting in that last conversation with John is he talked about we all know and believe that eating 5 portions of fruit and veg a day is a good thing. We know we need to do it, but how many do it? And how many people are suffering from heart disease, problems, cancers and issues as a result of poor diet and well-being? Loads of people.
Yeah.
We know that information, but we choose to either ignore it or do very little about it. Through creating great habits, you have to reflect, you have to stay curious, and you have to create a window of opportunity to do that. And that in the business sense is where we thrive, because we create those moments and we allow people to think differently and say, let's evaluate what you might already know, but you're just not doing.
Yeah.
You see, I mean, it's a couple of weeks ago now, and we were doing a piece around high-performing teams. And actually the sport analogy and the sports science thing, it's actually quite an easy sort of link to make. And in a room of about 30 people, the most senior person in the room sort of turned around, sort of in a quiet moment, she said to me, I don't like sport. I really can't stand it. Just, what? I was like, what? Any sport? Yeah, none of it. Don't like that. Right. Okay. Well, how do we have
Three
this?
movies, what else?
What's the link? But actually, what you were saying there is actually, let's forget about all the analogies and the stories. Let's talk about actually what you actually do in terms of the way that you think and the habits that you have around that passion to want to be high performing, and trying to do that without using any sporting analogies was a really interesting learning experience for myself. Right, how do I explain this? And actually, it's that whole unhelpful habits piece, that sense of, okay, well, stop, think about what you're doing, why you're doing it. Okay, how could you do that better? The self-watching piece. The personal habit analysis. And in fairness to the individual, highly self-aware, very emotionally intelligent, but that whole sense of, yes, projected outwards to her team, well, you need to stop and project it inwards and really start to think about, okay, well, how do you use those skills that in fact very, very good at in terms of supporting everybody else? Well, okay, how do you apply that to yourself? And really interesting to get that sort of conversation going, just on a one-to-one basis within a room of sort of 30 people, to get her to do that, what you were describing there, that pause, stop, think, and it probably took her about a minute. You know, when somebody's got that capability to just stop and switch it round. And it was really just sort of sat with her for a few moments, and then she was like, yes, okay, thank you. You can go on with what you're doing now.
The reality
I've worked that out. I've worked that out for myself.
Internalised it, and go again.
Okay, thank you. And sort of, my work here is done. And
that's right. You push the door out and they walk through. Great.
And actually, I think one of the things I get from that sort of coaching approach and that coaching style, this particular lady, very, very intelligent, very successful in what she's doing. What can I give you? And actually, what you mentioned earlier about where's the value to be had from that, I think as long as both of us are getting a sense of value from the conversations and the interactions and the time spent together, I think maybe we might sometimes have different measures of what that value is. And your point, Genevieve, really interesting around that headspace, that time to think and actually just give myself some time for me.
My experience in that field is that I think the most senior people in those organisations have a duty to look and sound like they know what they're doing at all times, because they are the guiding light and they're the reference for all of the employees to be inspired. And you said it earlier, Jason. Some of these people are still needing support and guidance, and they don't know all the answers. And our job is to create that moment to give them the time to talk. And vulnerability, we've mentioned it in this discussion. That's where that comes out. These people think, I can actually talk to someone that's not on the board, not working for me, about how I'm actually feeling and what I'm going through. And they have no reference to this because they don't work here. And actually, they can give me some really good advice that's industry wide.
And I think the more senior
The
somebody
more
is,
the more isolated,
the more important because who does the CEO go and talk to? If there is that feeling of I don't know the answers, I'm opening myself up to potential criticism or concern from other people who are in sort of my sort of peer group.
I was working at a global financial organization, and the leadership was about to change. And so they were inviting a few people to come express their interest in taking over the next role. And one of my regular coaching people who used me for a sort of philosophical space and figuring out how to do what they wanted to do better, high performance, was talking to me about it. And it was, it's obvious, isn't it? You should always want the next job up the ladder. And this is the top of the global ladder. So, of course, you should want it. And so I asked the curious question, do you want it? No one else asked that. right? Are you going for it? When are you applying? Blah, blah, blah. Who do you need to talk to? Do you want it? And their answer was, actually, no. How do you know you don't want it? I just don't feel good about it. Now, this is, I think, a really important piece of information. You can say the same thing, do the same thing from a good place or a bad place, from a place of being aligned and connected or a place of doing it out of fear. And if you're doing it out of fear, it's going to go squiffy at some point very, very quickly. So what they were trying to do is motivate themselves to get excited for this job that the whole world knows is the job that everybody should want, and they did not want it. And rather than say, right, we're going to twist your spiritual self into this shape, I just went, well, what do you want? And they knew immediately. And this is the joy of giving a little bit of thinking space to very intelligent people. I like being in a position where people know how clever I am, come to me for advice and guidance, and I get to use all my energy to give them a really good answer, not use my energy to become visible. I don't want the king's seat. I want to be the philosopher that whispers in the ear of the king. Job done. You know? And it's that, think of all of those personal and intellectual resources that could have been burned up and wasted on possibly running it very well, but I bet their personal life would have gone down the pan. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I love those moments. And that's what I mean by always be exactly who you are, right?
I think at this moment there are hundreds of people listening to this going, that's the one that I want to be. Because what a cool place to be. Yeah?
That's the story I wanted to tell. Some people, I've been in many pubs where people are like, oh, you're a coach, you know, we had coaching and I don't want to, because it's not really coaching. It's just pressurizing people to go up the ladder. And I've been in many pubs with many people saying, just tell them. If you have a feeling that it doesn't feel right, it might not be that there's something wrong with you. Absolutely. It might be that you get to take responsibility for telling the world what seat you want to sit in.
Yeah. Identifying high potential in businesses is often performed by saying that person does that job that are in really well. So naturally, they'll be really good at the next role up the ladder. And in my career, and Jason feel the same, automotive, that tends to be the recipe. You see a lot of salespeople, junior sales contacts moving up, but by virtue of their role into a management or leadership position. They're not necessarily the most qualified, but on paper, they've performed really well because they've sold cars or sold hours in the workshop. So that's the role for them. But deep down, they haven't been taught how to do that, and they struggle.
But also, and like in the corporate things, I mean, with manufacturers often and NMSCs and that, so that you have people almost like, you know, they're the training manager now, then they go into after sales, then they go into this, and they move around, and they have like a portfolio for a couple of years to build their experience. I absolutely understand why, absolutely, but they're not all going to become managing director or president or whatever. You can't. There's one job there, and there's 40 people at the next level of management. And actually, some people are really, really good at what they do, and they're really happy there. And there's that connection with other organisations, and it's a joy when you meet someone that they say, "Oh, I've been doing this for 12 years or whatever." Because I don't look at them and go, "Oh, stagnated then." Right, no. Oh, hit a bit of a roadblock in your career. Quite the opposite. They're actually very good at what they do. People respect that is what they're good at. They enjoy it, and they've given their best for 12 years.
Yes.
And I think we just need, in the corporate culture, sometimes we need to remind people of that. It's not all about doing every job in the organisation to get experience to become the MD or the president, because guess what? They're not going to.
No.
And it's okay to have someone doing the same thing.
It's actually quite brilliant. I mean, I'm sure we've all been blessed with being around people who know that they fit where they are. Absolutely. They're so comfortable in their skin that they give you permission to be comfortable in your skin. And then you can ask stupid questions and you can learn quickly and you can...
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like higher up is not better. And leadership can convey that, I think. Leadership can create a culture where people really do get to explore what the right fit is for them without feeling like they're failing by not following one path of action. That's where leadership can really make things better in the world.
In a leadership role, I'm not saying this is the model for leadership, but many roles and successful people, it goes back to what we were saying at the start, Jason, with yourself, are great storytellers. They're visionaries. They know what they're trying to achieve, and they tell a great story, and they know how to get the best out of people, or certainly are on the journey to doing that. And that is what we want to see distilled across a lot of the team, because they buy in and they have loyalty. And then you find your home. As you said, Jason, I couldn't agree more. You don't necessarily have to have everybody aspiring to be the next best thing.
Yeah.
Those 12, 15 years of service, they're absolutely essential for the leader to survive and the organisation to survive. So by empowering those people to stay loyal and make them feel like their contributions are hugely valued is the art of the leader. We don't want everyone thinking they can take my job or your job, the next one. It becomes a one-upmanship. You really need that community that's brought together by that person who knows how to get the best out of people. So we have spent a lot of time covering some ground here, some great stories and some insight. And I reckon we could do two or three more episodes on this. So
let's see if there's thumbs up or thumbs down. It's up to you, viewers.
The realist in the room,
do you want to hear
Jason.
more or less? No, it's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been
Thank you.
great. And before we end, one last question to each of you. If I ask for one word based on your experiences of being led by someone, what one word would you use that positively describes the modern day leader? Someone that's had impact on you. One word. Jason?
I would say belief. Their utter belief and confidence in what they're executing. Not to say they're not prepared to change that strategy and adapt, but what they're doing, they're absolutely engaged in. That bleeds down into you all align. So it's that kind of, and it hasn't got to be a loud confidence, a boorish. It's just a quiet, it's okay. I know what we're doing. Follow me. It's going to be okay. And trust is kind of wrapped up in that. But I think belief is where it starts.
Like it.
Well, I was going to say trust.
Can't use it now.
Well, I'm going to use it anyway.
Yeah, use it.
In my team and my people, and for me, trust is always top down. If my leader doesn't trust me, then how could I possibly trust them? And I think creating that environment massively important. I think trust is the basis of all of that.
So I would have said curiosity, but I'm going to choose a slightly different one. You said belief and you said trust. So I'm going to build on those, assuming we have those two in place. Openness. I think that incorporates the curiosity, but there's something about holding a position of visible leadership, at least, and showing openness that allows people to grow and flourish, that doesn't take away the sort of security and safety you give people by taking responsibility for it. But I think leaders close off too much. And in that closed off space, we lose a lot that we could have from them. So.
Love it.
What about you, Matt?
Yeah.
What about you?
You've given some really good answers, and I think all of those put together really sum up where I come from with my answer, and that is authenticity. And I know I've used that word already, but I think very much what you've said earlier in the session, you have to stay true to yourself, and you need to know why you're doing what you're doing. And sometimes it can take 5 years, as we've discovered from one of our guests, but you need to know why you're doing what you're doing, or be on a discovery for that. And then people buy into the values and DNA that you're creating around you in the organisation. And I just firmly believe that the operational stuff can be taught, that can be coached in, and it can be done over time. But getting the right people and the right mind and brain states is delivered through inspirational leadership and through people that truly believe that the collective can come together and do great things. So authenticity for me is the key. And I've seen it in my career where, same example, I'm sorry to keep coming back to you, Jason, but it rings a bell for me. You know that person when they've had a touch point with you. You can't decipher the secret sauce, but you just know they are an incredible person. And that's what everybody aspires to do when they're in a leadership position, is have that essence and leave people feeling better about themselves when they finish work.
And I think you just said the word, and I'm going to preface the word leadership with it. As many times as I can now, inspirational leadership.
Yes.
Because that's actually what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
I think, that's been silent and in brackets, but it's what we mean. And that's really what differentiates the leader from the manager.
Correct.
Because the managers kind of manage and do a great job, but the
Or the leader
does it
from the
in
bully.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of dictator or
Yeah.
whatever through fear. But inspirational leadership, yeah, absolutely. Note to self.
Yes. They're creating a vision and they're setting a cultural tone that people want to be part of.
Yeah.
And that's your job advert. When you're going out and you're trying to place people and hire people, that reputation precedes you. So if you're a leader that can be talked about, just as we talked about with Audi and we've talked about Keith and all the other great names and Vicky, all these people have a history and a provenance and a reputation based on looking after people. Not once did we say how much money they made for the organisation, market share. We talked about how that person left us feeling. And that's our goal, because then we stay committed to the cause and we're going to deliver great things.
Yeah.
So on that note, I want to say thank you so much. Some of you have come an incredibly long way to be here. It's hugely valued.
Brisbane, flew in from Brisbane.
Yeah,
right.
The private jet's outside for Jason. I want to say thank you again. It's great to have you here. And as I mentioned at the start, if it's not clear to those listening and watching, this is the team behind the great work we do at ezeni. And you guys also have your own organisations that you do work in. So again, you're giving up your time, which is incredibly valued. And I look forward to working with you on more projects. And I hope, as you said, Jason, everybody watching and listening has taken immense value from this. So join us again soon for another episode of Lead By. Thank you for tuning in.